In 1805, two brothers from Boston traveled to the Caribbean, unaware that the heat they were about to experience would change global trade forever. Their names were Frederic Tudor and William Tudor. They came from a well-connected Massachusetts family, with money, education, and access to opportunity. They were not desperate men looking for survival. They were ambitious young men looking for expansion. At the time, trade between New England and the Caribbean was common. But what struck them most was not the business potential. It was the climate. The Caribbean heat was relentless. There were no cold winters, no frozen ponds, no seasonal relief. Food spoiled quickly, drinks were warm, illness spread easily, everything felt heavy. Then, yellow fever arrived. In the early 19th century, yellow fever was terrifying. There were no modern treatments, no vaccines. Doctors did not fully understand how it spread. When someone became infected, their body temperature soared. High fever, chills, weakness, and often death followed. One of the Tudor brothers fell ill during their stay. Frederic watched as the fever consumed him. The heat only made everything worse. Cooling the body was nearly impossible in a tropical colony where ice simply did not exist. Unfortunately, his brother did not survive. He died far from home, in a place defined by heat and disease. Frederic Tudor was devastated. Grief has a strange way of reshaping memory, and in the years that followed he convinced himself of something powerful. If only there had been ice, if only there had been a way to cool his brother's burning body, perhaps he would have survived. Whether that belief was scientifically correct did not matter. In Frederic's mind, ice became something larger than frozen water. It became relief. It became preservation. It became hope. When Frederic returned to Massachusetts, winter had settled in. Ponds and lakes were frozen solid. Thick sheets of ice stretched across the landscape. People walked on it, skated on it, and, well, chopped it aside when it blocked pathways. It had no real value. It cost nothing. It melted every spring and disappeared without notice. But Frederic saw something no one else saw. He saw unused abundance in the north and unbearable heat in the south. He saw comfort just sitting idle in frozen ponds while people in tropical colonies suffered. And he asked a question that sounded, honestly, ridiculous to everyone around him. What if I could ship ice to the Caribbean? In 1806, at just 23 years old, he invested roughly $10,000 of his own money into the idea, which was, honestly, an enormous sum at the time, equivalent to hundreds of thousands of dollars today. He hired workers to cut blocks of ice from frozen ponds in Massachusetts. They packed the ice onto a ship bound for Martinique. Most people laughed at him openly. Newspapers mocked the idea. Competitors, well, they predicted instant failure. Ice, they argued, would melt long before reaching the tropics. And even if some survived, who would pay for frozen water? When the ship arrived in the Caribbean, much of the ice had indeed melted. The financial loss was painful. Transportation methods were inefficient. Insulation was poor. Storage facilities in the islands were inadequate. By conventional standards, the venture looked like a disaster. But, not all the ice melted. Wealthy plantation owners and merchants were fascinated. Cold drinks in tropical heat were not a small luxury. They felt revolutionary. The novelty alone drew attention. Ice cream, chilled wine, preserved food. These experiences transformed social life for those who could afford it. A small but meaningful demand began to form among the Caribbean elite. Frederic understood something critical. If even a small group of wealthy clients valued ice, there was a market. And, markets can be built. He continued shipping ice south. The early years were financially brutal. Losses piled up, insurance costs were high, melt rates destroyed profit margins. He borrowed aggressively to stay afloat. At one point, his debts reportedly reached nearly $200,000, a staggering liability in the early 19th century. Creditors pursued him relentlessly. Lawsuits mounted. Eventually, he was thrown into debtor's prison. For many, that would have been the end of the story. But prison did not change his mind. It actually forced him to rethink his system. Frederic realized that his idea was not flawed. His logistics were. Ice needed better cutting methods, tighter packing, stronger insulation, and reliable storage on arrival. He began working with innovators like Nathaniel Wyeth, who developed tools that allowed workers to cut uniform blocks of ice rather than uneven chunks. Uniform blocks stacked tightly, reducing air pockets and slowing melting. Then came a simple but powerful solution: sawdust. Sawdust, a byproduct of lumber mills, turned out to be an exceptional insulator. When packed around ice blocks inside ships and storage houses, it significantly reduced melting. It was cheap, abundant, and effective. Suddenly, the economics shifted. Melt losses decreased, shipments became predictable. By the 1820s, the business stabilized. Cuba became one of his most profitable markets. Havana, wealthy and strategically positioned, provided consistent demand. Tudor invested in permanent ice houses there, insulated storage facilities that preserved large quantities of imported ice. Some years, he shipped more than 10,000 tons of ice to Cuba alone. The numbers began to scale. Ice harvested in Massachusetts at minimal cost could be sold in the Caribbean for prices that generated strong margins once transportation losses were controlled. He expanded further into southern U.S. cities like Charleston and New Orleans, where heat and humidity created similar demand. Restaurants, hotels, and wealthy households began incorporating ice into daily life. Cold beverages became symbols of status and modernity. Hospitals began using ice in medical treatments. Food preservation improved. Then he attempted something that sounded even more impossible than the Caribbean trade: India. In 1833, one of his ships carried New England ice nearly 15,000 miles to Calcutta. The journey took approximately 4 months. Many predicted complete failure. But when the ship arrived, a substantial portion of the ice remained intact, thanks to improved insulation and packing methods. British colonials in India were stunned. Ice in India felt like a technological miracle. Demand surged quickly among the elite. Ice houses were constructed in Calcutta specifically for American imports. Prices were high, and margins were substantial. The success of the Indian shipment proved that natural ice could survive extreme distances and climates if handled properly. By the 1840s and 50s, Tudor's operations reached peak scale. He was exporting roughly 100,000 tons of ice annually to markets across the Caribbean, the American South, and parts of Asia. Entire communities in Massachusetts became dependent on winter ice harvesting. Thousands of workers participated in cutting, storing, transporting, and loading ice each season. What began as a personal idea driven by grief evolved into an organized international industry. He earned the nickname the Ice King. Governments and port authorities took notice. Some reduced tariffs on ice imports because they stimulated local luxury economies. Ice reshaped social behavior. It influenced dining, medicine, hospitality, and urban development. Something once considered worthless had become globally traded. The business was never without risk. Storms sank ships. Political instability in colonial regions disrupted contracts. Economic downturns reduced luxury spending. Competitors emerged. And yet, by mid-century, Frederic Tudor had secured significant wealth. The man once mocked for attempting to sell frozen water across the ocean had built a fortune from winter itself. He did not invent refrigeration. He did not invent shipping. He did not invent ice harvesting. What he did was see a connection others ignored. He saw that value is often geographic. Something abundant in one place can be priceless in another. He saw that climate differences could become economic opportunities. As mechanical refrigeration technology developed later in the 19th century, artificial ice factories eventually replaced the natural ice trade. The industry Tudor built began to decline, but by that time, his legacy was secure. He had already transformed a seasonal nuisance into an international commodity. Frederic Tudor died wealthy and respected. The same society that once laughed at him now recognized him as a pioneer of global trade innovation. At its core, this story is not simply about ice. It is about perception. It is about recognizing opportunity in what others dismiss. It is about how grief, ambition, and persistence can combine to build something massive from almost nothing. A young man watched his brother die in the heat of yellow fever and became convinced that coal could change the world. Whether that belief was scientifically accurate is less important than what it produced. He connected frozen New England ponds to tropical colonies thousands of miles away.